The blood on her face had already started to dry by the time she stumbled past the old wooden fence at the edge of Enid, Oklahoma. Her vision blurred, and her legs barely holding her weight. Beatrice Gallagher had made the mistake of telling Gerald Hutchins that his money and his status meant nothing to her, that she would rather die alone than accept his advances, and he had made sure she understood the consequences of rejecting a man like him. It was the spring of 1889, and women who refused powerful men often paid the price in bruises and broken bones, their voices swallowed by the vast prairie wind that swept across the Oklahoma territory. She collapsed near a creek bed, the cool water just inches from her outstretched fingers. Every breath sent sharp pain through her ribs, and she could taste copper in her mouth. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and Beatrice thought about how beautiful it was, how strange that the world could look so lovely while she felt so broken. She closed her eyes, not sure if she would open them again. Quincy Whitman had been tracking a horse thief for 3 days, following a trail that led him through the rough terrain south of Enid. He was a ranch hand who worked for the Miller family, a quiet man of 26 years who had learned to read the land the way most men read newspapers. His dark hair was dusty from the trail, and his blue eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion that pulled at his shoulders. He had been ready to make camp when he spotted something unusual near the creek, a splash of blue fabric that did not belong to the landscape. He urged his horse forward, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. As he got closer, his heart seized in his chest. A woman lay motionless on the ground, her dress torn and stained with blood. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to her side. "Madam," he said, kneeling beside her. His voice was rough from disuse but gentle. "Madam, can you hear me?" Beatrice's eyes fluttered open. Through the haze of pain, she saw a man's face above her, concern etched into every line. She tried to speak, but only a whimper escaped her lips. Quincy's jaw tightened as he took in the extent of her injuries. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lips split, and there were bruises forming along her neck and arms. This was not an accident. Someone had done this to her, had hurt her deliberately. A cold anger settled in his chest, the kind that burned slow and steady. "I am going to help you," he said, carefully sliding one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees. She cried out in pain as he lifted her, and he whispered apologies as he carried her to his horse. "I know it hurts. I am sorry, but I need to get you somewhere safe." He managed to get her onto the horse, holding her carefully against his chest as he mounted behind her. She was shaking, whether from shock or cold or fear he could not tell, but he wrapped his coat around her and held her steady as he turned his horse toward town. The ride back to Enid took an hour, and Quincy talked to her the entire way, keeping her conscious. He told her about the ranch where he worked, about the horses he trained, about the way the prairie grass turned gold in the summer. She did not respond, but he felt her breathing against his chest, felt the slight weight of her head resting against his shoulder, and he knew she was listening. When they reached town, most businesses had closed for the night, but Doc Harrison's office still had a lamp burning in the window. Quincy dismounted carefully, lifting Beatrice down and carrying her up the steps. He kicked at the door with his boot. Doc Harrison, I need help." The door opened to reveal a gray-haired man in his 50s, his spectacles sliding down his nose. His eyes widened when he saw the woman in Quincy's arms. "Bring her in, quickly," he said, stepping aside. "Put her on the examination table." Quincy laid her down as gently as he could, then stepped back, his hands clenched at his sides. Doc Harrison lit more lamps and began examining her injuries, asking Quincy questions about how he had found her. "Who did this?" the doctor asked, cleaning the blood from her face. "I do not know," Quincy said, "but I intend to find out." Beatrice's good eye opened, and she looked at Quincy with an intensity that caught him off guard. "Gerald Hutchins," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He wanted me to marry him. I said no." The name hit Quincy like a punch to the gut. Gerald Hutchins owned half the businesses in Enid, and his father sat on the territorial council. He was powerful, connected, and apparently thought that power gave him the right to hurt women who refused him. "That will never happen again," Quincy said, and the quiet certainty in his voice made both Beatrice and Doc Harrison look at him. "I give you my word." Doc Harrison worked on Beatrice for over an hour, cleaning her wounds, wrapping her ribs, giving her something for the pain. Quincy waited outside, pacing the narrow porch like a caged animal. When the doctor finally emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth, Quincy stopped mid-stride. "She has 3 broken ribs, extensive bruising, and a concussion," Doc Harrison said, "but she will recover. She is strong, that one. She needs rest and time to heal." "Where will she go?" Quincy asked. "I do not know. She has been staying at the boarding house, but I doubt she will feel safe there now, and with Hutchins running loose, she has good reason to be afraid." Quincy did not hesitate. "She can stay at the Miller Ranch. We have room, and Mrs. Miller would welcome her. She will be safe there." Doc Harrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I will talk to her when she wakes, but Quincy, be careful. Gerald Hutchins is not a man to cross." "Neither am I," Quincy said quietly. Beatrice slept through the night, and when she woke the next morning, she found Doc Harrison sitting beside her bed, reading a medical journal. The pain in her body was still there, but dulled by whatever medicine he had given her. She turned her head slowly, taking in the unfamiliar room. "Where am I?" she asked. "My office," he replied, setting down his journal. "You had quite a night. How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," she said, attempting a weak smile. "The man who found me, is he still here?" "Quincy." "He stayed all night, just left an hour ago to get some rest and talk to his employers. He wants you to stay at the Miller Ranch while you recover. It would be safer than the boarding house." Beatrice closed her eyes, tears sliding down her temples. "I do not even know him." "He seems like a good man, and you need somewhere safe to heal. Gerald Hutchins is still in town, and from what you told Quincy last night, he is the one who did this to you." The fear that flashed across her face was answer enough. "I will kill him if he comes near you again," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice, only exhaustion and pain. "You will not need to," Doc Harrison said. "Quincy made a promise to you. I have known that young man for 5 years, and he does not make promises lightly." 2 days later, when Beatrice was strong enough to travel, Quincy arrived with a wagon. He had padded the bed with blankets and hay to make the ride as comfortable as possible. Doc Harrison helped her outside, and Quincy jumped down from the driver's seat, his hat in his hands. "Miss Gallagher," he said, his voice formal but his eyes warm. "The Miller family is expecting you. Mrs. Miller has prepared a room, and she is eager to meet you." Beatrice looked at this man who had saved her life, who had promised to protect her, and she felt something shift in her chest. He was tall and lean, with calloused hands and a face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind, and when he looked at her, she did not see pity. She saw respect. "Thank you," she said. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Quincy said, helping her into the wagon. "Just focus on getting well." The Miller Ranch was 10 miles outside of Enid, a sprawling property with a main house, several barns and corrals filled with horses. As they approached, Beatrice could see a woman standing on the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. When the wagon pulled up, she hurried down the steps. "You must be Beatrice," she said warmly. She was in her 40s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and a smile that reached her eyes. "I am Margaret Miller. Welcome to our home." Quincy helped Beatrice down from the wagon, and Margaret immediately took her arm, supporting her weight as they walked into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and curtains that let in the afternoon light. Margaret led her to a bedroom on the first floor, a small room with a window overlooking the garden. "You can stay here as long as you need," Margaret said, helping Beatrice sit on the bed. "Quincy told us what happened. I am so sorry you had to endure that, but you are safe now. My husband and our ranch hands will make sure of it." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears again. She had been alone for so long, making her way as a seamstress in a town where she knew no one. Her parents had died of fever 2 years ago, and she had come to Oklahoma Territory hoping for a fresh start. Instead, she had found Gerald Hutchins, a man who thought his wealth entitled him to anything he wanted, including her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are very kind." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Rest now. I will bring you some supper later." Over the next few weeks, Beatrice slowly healed. Her bruises faded from purple to green to yellow, and her ribs stopped hurting quite so much when she breathed. Margaret checked on her several times a day, bringing food and fresh water, sitting with her and telling stories about the ranch and the people who lived there. Beatrice learned that Margaret and her husband Thomas had built the ranch from nothing 20 years ago, that they had 2 grown sons who now ran their own spreads further south, and that Quincy had come to work for them 5 years ago after his own family's farm had been destroyed by a twister. "He is a good man," Margaret said one afternoon as she helped Beatrice walk around the garden. "Quiet but steady, you can count on him." "He barely knows me," Beatrice said, "yet he has done so much." "That is just who he is," Margaret replied. "He sees someone in need and he helps. No questions, no expectations." Quincy kept his distance at first, wanting to give Beatrice space to recover without feeling pressured or watched. But every evening he would stop by the house after finishing his work, hat in hand, and ask Margaret how Beatrice was doing. Sometimes Beatrice would be awake, sitting in the parlor with a book or some mending, and he would nod to her politely before leaving. They exchanged few words, but Beatrice found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, for his quiet voice asking about her. One evening, 3 weeks after she had arrived at the ranch, Beatrice was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Quincy rode up on a beautiful chestnut mare. He dismounted and walked over, and for the first time, he sat down beside her on the steps. "You look better," he said, glancing at her. "The bruises are almost gone." "I feel better," she said. "Thanks to you and the Millers. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me." "I am glad I did," he said simply. "No one deserves what he did to you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch. A horse whinnied in the distance, and somewhere a dog barked. The sky turned from orange to pink to purple, and Beatrice felt a peace she had not known in months. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course." "Why did you make that promise? That it would never happen again? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Quincy turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were serious. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because when I look at you, I see someone strong and brave, someone who stood up to a bully even though it cost you dearly. That takes courage, and courage deserves to be protected." Beatrice felt her breath catch in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such simple honesty. "I did not feel brave," she admitted. "I felt terrified." "Being brave does not mean you are not scared," Quincy said. "It means you do what is right even when you are." From that evening on, they began spending more time together. Quincy would finish his work early and come to the house, and they would sit on the porch or walk through the gardens, talking about everything and nothing. Beatrice told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents and the small farm where she had grown up. Quincy told her about learning to ride before he could walk, about the twister that had taken his family's home and how he had rebuilt his life one day at a time. "You miss them?" Beatrice asked one day as they walked along the creek that ran through the property. "Your parents?" "Every day," Quincy said. "But missing them does not mean I stop living. They would have wanted me to keep going to find happiness where I could." "Have you found it?" she asked, looking up at him. He met her gaze and held it. "I think I am starting to." Beatrice felt her heart skip. Over the past few weeks, she had found herself thinking about Quincy more and more. She thought about the way he removed his hat when he entered a room, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words were the most important thing in the world. She thought about his strong hands and gentle touch, the way he had carried her when she was broken and made her feel safe. "Quincy," she said softly, stopping by the water's edge, "I need to tell you something." He turned to face her fully, his expression open and patient. "I am listening. I was scared to trust anyone after what happened. I thought maybe all men were like Gerald Hutchins, that they only wanted to take and control. But you showed me that is not true. You have been nothing but kind and respectful. And I find myself wanting to spend more time with you, wanting to know you better." A slow smile spread across Quincy's face, transforming his usually serious features. "I want that too," he said. "More than I can say. From the moment I saw you by that creek, something in me knew, I cannot explain it, but I knew you were going to change my life. For better or worse." She asked, smiling despite the tears that threatened. "For better," he said firmly. "Always for better." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, the water gurgling past their feet and the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. It was a beginning, fragile and new, but it felt right. But their peace was not to last. 2 days later, Gerald Hutchins rode onto the Miller property with 3 of his men. Quincy was in the barn when he heard the commotion, and he came out to find Hutchins sitting on his horse in the yard, his face red with anger. "I am here for Beatrice Gallagher," Hutchins announced loudly. "She has property of mine, and I intend to collect." Thomas Miller stepped out of the house, his own expression hard. He was a big man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from years of commanding respect. "She has nothing of yours, Hutchins, and you are not welcome on my land." "The woman is a thief," Hutchins said, his voice dripping with false righteousness. "She stole from me and I want her arrested." Quincy moved to stand beside Thomas, his hand resting on his gun. "She stole nothing. You beat her because she rejected you. Everyone in this territory knows what kind of man you are." Hutchins's eyes narrowed when he saw Quincy. "The ranch hand has opinions. How touching. But this is between me and the woman. Hand her over or I will go to the marshal." "Go ahead," Thomas said. "Marshal Brennan is a friend of mine. I am sure he would be very interested to hear about how you assaulted a defenseless woman." "You have no proof," Hutchins spat. "I have her testimony," Quincy said, "and the doctor who treated her injuries. That is more than enough." Hutchins's face twisted with rage. "You think you can protect her? You are nobody. I own this town. One word from me and you will never work again. And as for her, she will learn that no one refuses Gerald Hutchins." "Get off my property," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Now, before I have my men remove you." For a moment, it looked like Hutchins might argue, but he saw the determination in the faces of the men around him and seemed to think better of it. "This is not over," he said, yanking his horse's reins and turning to leave. His men followed, casting uneasy glances back at the ranch. Beatrice had watched the entire confrontation from the window, her heart pounding. When the men were gone, she ran outside to where Quincy and Thomas stood. "He is not going to give up," she said, her voice shaking. "He will find a way to hurt you, to hurt all of you because of me. Maybe I should just leave, go somewhere else where he cannot find me." "No," Quincy said firmly, taking her shoulders in his hands. "I told you that would never happen again, and I meant it. You are not running. We are going to face this together." "But he is powerful," she protested. "He has money and connections. What do we have? The truth," Quincy said. "And each other. That has to be enough." Thomas nodded in agreement. "We have dealt with men like Hutchins before. Bullies thrive on fear, but they crumble when people stand up to them. We are not going to let him intimidate us." That night, Quincy sat with Beatrice on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. She was scared. He could see it in the way her hands trembled and the way she kept glancing toward the road. He wanted to take away her fear, to promise her that everything would be fine, but he had learned long ago that some promises could not be kept. All he could do was be there, steady and sure. "Tell me something good," Beatrice said suddenly. "Something that has nothing to do with Gerald Hutchins or fear or anger. Tell me about something that makes you happy." Quincy thought for a moment. "Mornings," he said. "I love the early mornings here before the sun comes up. The air is cool and everything is quiet, and you can hear the horses moving in their stalls. It feels like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for something beautiful to happen." Beatrice smiled. "That does sound beautiful. And you," he added, looking at her, "you make me happy. Talking to you, being near you, that makes me happy." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You make me happy too. You make me feel like maybe I can have a life again, a real life, not just surviving but actually living." "You can," he said. "We can, together." The next morning, Quincy rode into Enid to speak with Marshal Brennan. The marshal's office was a small building near the center of town, and when Quincy entered, he found the lawman sitting at his desk, writing reports. "Quincy Whitman," Marshal Brennan said, looking up. He was a lean man in his 50s with a graying mustache and sharp eyes. "What brings you to town?" Quincy told him everything about finding Beatrice, about her injuries, about Gerald Hutchins and his threats. Marshal Brennan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail. "I have heard rumors about Hutchins," he said when Quincy finished. "But no one has ever been willing to testify against him. People are too afraid of losing their livelihoods." "Beatrice will testify," Quincy said, "and so will I, and Doc Harrison can provide evidence of her injuries." The marshal leaned back in his chair, considering. "It will be difficult. Hutchins's father has friends in high places. But if the woman is willing to stand up in court and tell her story, I will do what I can. The law is supposed to protect everyone, not just the rich and powerful." "Thank you," Quincy said, relief flooding through him. "That is all I ask." When he returned to the ranch and told Beatrice what the marshal had said, she was quiet for a long time. The thought of standing up in front of a courtroom, of facing Gerald Hutchins again, terrified her. But she looked at Quincy, at the faith and trust in his eyes, and she found her courage. "I will do it," she said. "I will testify. He needs to answer for what he did, and if I do not speak up, he will just hurt someone else." "I will be there with you," Quincy promised, "every step of the way." The trial took place 6 weeks later in the territorial courthouse in Guthrie, the territorial capital. Quincy, Beatrice, and the Millers made the journey together, staying at a hotel near the courthouse. Beatrice barely slept the night before she was to testify, lying awake and staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through everything she would have to say. When morning came, Quincy met her outside her room. He did not say anything. just offered his arm, and she took it gratefully. They walked into the courthouse together, and Beatrice felt her terror ease slightly with him beside her. The courtroom was packed with people, many of them curious townspeople who had heard about the case. Gerald Hutchins sat at the defendant's table with his expensive lawyers, his face a mask of smug confidence. When he saw Beatrice, his lips curved into a cruel smile, and she felt her resolve waver. Then Quincy squeezed her hand, and she remembered why she was doing this. The prosecutor called her to the stand, and she walked up with her head high. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. And then she told her story. She told the court about how Gerald Hutchins had pursued her, how he had sent her gifts she did not want, how he had cornered her one evening outside the boarding house and demanded that she marry him. She told them how she had refused, how she had tried to walk away, and how he had grabbed her and beaten her, his fists raining down on her face and body while he called her terrible names. He said no one refuses him, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. He said he would make me sorry, and then he left me there, bleeding and broken, like I was nothing. The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Hutchins's lawyers seemed shaken. The prosecutor called Doc Harrison next, and he testified about the extent of Beatrice's injuries, producing detailed notes and sketches that made several jury members wince. When it was the defense's turn, Hutchins's lawyers tried to paint Beatrice as a woman of loose morals who had led their client on, and then cried assault when he rejected her. But their story fell apart under cross-examination, especially when Quincy took the stand and described finding her near death by the creek, miles from town. She could barely speak, Quincy said, his voice hard. She was terrified and in pain. No woman would do that to herself. And I saw her injuries with my own eyes. That was not someone who had been rejected. That was someone who had been brutalized. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim. The foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts of assault and battery. Gerald Hutchins's face went white, then red. He stood up, shouting that the trial was a sham, that his father would have them all removed from their positions. But the judge banged his gavel and sentenced Hutchins to 5 years of hard labor in the territorial prison. As the marshals led him away in chains, he locked eyes with Beatrice, and she saw the hatred there. But she also saw defeat, and she knew that he would never hurt her again. Outside the courthouse, Beatrice collapsed into Quincy's arms, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. He held her close, murmuring words of comfort and pride. "You were so brave," he said. "You stood up to him and you won. I am so proud of you." "I could not have done it without you," she said, pulling back to look at him. "You gave me the courage to fight. You showed me that I deserved better." "You do deserve better," he said. "You deserve everything good in this world, and if you will let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." Right there on the courthouse steps, with people streaming past them, Quincy Whitman got down on one knee. He pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket, a ring that had belonged to his mother. "Beatrice Gallagher," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we have not known each other long, but I know my heart and I know it belongs to you. Will you marry me?" Beatrice looked down at this man who had saved her life, who had protected her and believed in her when she did not believe in herself. She thought about the mornings he loved, about sitting on the porch watching sunsets, about building a life with someone who saw her as an equal and a partner. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear. "Yes, I will marry you." He stood and kissed her, and the people on the courthouse steps broke into applause. It was not the most romantic proposal, perhaps, but it was real and honest and full of love, and that was more than enough. They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the Miller Ranch. Margaret had helped Beatrice make her dress, a simple cream-colored gown with lace at the collar. Quincy wore his best suit, his hair combed back and his boots polished. Marshal Brennan officiated, and the Millers stood as witnesses. When Quincy said his vows, promising to love and protect Beatrice for all his days, she saw the truth of those words in his eyes. And when she made her own promises, to stand beside him through joy and hardship, to build a life together, she meant every word. They spent their first night as husband and wife in a small cabin on the far edge of the Miller property, a place Thomas had offered them as a wedding gift. It was modest but comfortable, with a fireplace and a bed and a table Quincy had made with his own hands. Beatrice stood in the doorway, looking at this space that was now theirs, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Quincy came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am happy," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Truly, deeply happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again after what happened. But you gave me back my life. You gave me hope. You gave me purpose," he said. "Before I found you, I was just going through the motions. But loving you, protecting you, being with you, that gives my life meaning." They made love that night with tenderness and care. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to step into the light together. And when Beatrice fell asleep in Quincy's arms, she did not dream of violence or fear. She dreamed of mornings and sunsets, of children laughing, of a future full of possibility. Over the next year, Quincy and Beatrice built their life together. Quincy continued working for the Millers, but he also began breaking horses on the side, building a reputation as one of the best trainers in the territory. Beatrice opened a small seamstress shop in Enid, her skills quickly making her one of the most sought-after dressmakers in the area. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they could buy their own piece of land. That day came sooner than they expected. Thomas Miller, whose health had been declining, decided to sell off a portion of his ranch. He offered Quincy and Beatrice 160 acres at a price they could afford, land that bordered the creek where Quincy had found her that fateful evening. "It seems fitting," Thomas said when he made the offer, "that the place where your story began becomes the place where you build your future." They accepted gratefully, and Quincy spent every spare moment building their home. It was not large, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was sturdy and well-made, every nail driven with care and love. Beatrice planted a garden, and by summer, they had tomatoes and beans and squash growing in neat rows. They bought chickens and a milk cow, and Quincy built a small barn for the horses he was training. On a warm evening in August of 1890, Beatrice stood on the porch of their home and watched Quincy working with a young stallion in the corral. The horse was wild and spirited, but Quincy was patient, his voice low and soothing as he worked to gain the animal's trust. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the slight swell there, and smiled. When Quincy finished and walked toward the house, she met him halfway. He was dusty and sweating, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "You look pleased with yourself," he said, kissing her forehead. "I have news," she said, taking his hands and placing them on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Quincy just stared at her, his mind processing the words. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he lifted her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said, setting her down gently. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said. "This is everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a life with you. I am the luckiest man alive." Their son was born the following spring, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas Quincy Whitman, after the man who had given them so much. Quincy held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny fingers and the perfect little face. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. Your mama and I are going to make sure you grow up knowing you are loved every single day of your life." Beatrice watched her husband with their son and felt her heart swell so much she thought it might burst. This was what she had survived for, what all the pain and fear had led to. This moment, this family, this love. The years that followed were not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters, years when money was tight and they had to scrape by. But they faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his father. When he was 3, Beatrice gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, who filled their home with laughter and chaos. Quincy proved to be a wonderful father, patient and kind, teaching his children to ride and read and treat others with respect. Beatrice ran her seamstress business from home now, balancing her work with raising their children. They were busy and sometimes exhausted, but they were happy. On Thomas's 10th birthday, Quincy took his son down to the creek where he had found Beatrice all those years ago. They sat on the bank, fishing poles in hand, and Quincy told him the story of how he had met his mother. "Your mama is the bravest person I have ever known," Quincy said. "She faced something terrible, but she did not let it define her. She chose to heal, to love, to build a life. That takes real courage." "Is that why you married her?" Thomas asked. "Because she was brave." "I married her because I love her," Quincy said. "Because she makes me want to be a better man. Because when I am with her, I feel like I am home. Love is not just about finding someone who makes you happy. It is about finding someone you want to face life with, someone whose happiness matters as much as your own." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I hope I find someone like that someday." "You will," Quincy said, ruffling his son's hair. "And when you do, you treat her with respect and kindness. You protect her and support her dreams. That is what real men do." That evening, after the children were asleep, Quincy and Beatrice sat on their porch watching the stars. It was their favorite time of day, these quiet moments when they could just be together without the demands of work and family. "You remember what you said to me the night you found me?" Beatrice asked, her head resting on Quincy's shoulder. "That it would never happen again," he said. "And it has not. And it never will, not as long as I am breathing." "You kept your promise," she said. "You have kept all your promises. You gave me safety and love and a family. You gave me a life worth living." "You did the same for me," he said. "Before you, I was just existing. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love with everything you have. You are my heart, Beatrice. Always have been, always will be." She turned to kiss him, and in that kiss was everything they had been through together. All the pain and triumph, all the ordinary days and extraordinary moments that had woven their lives into one. As the years continued to pass, their family grew. Thomas eventually married a kind young woman named Rachel from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Quincy and Beatrice their first grandchildren. The twins married good men who treated them well, and the homestead that had started with just Quincy and Beatrice became a gathering place for a large, loving family. Gerald Hutchins was released from prison after serving his full sentence, but his power was broken. His father had disowned him, and most people in the territory knew what he had done. He left Oklahoma and was never heard from again. Beatrice occasionally thought about him, but without fear or anger. He had hurt her, yes, but he had also set her on the path that led to Quincy. In a strange way, she was grateful for that. though she would never forgive what he had done. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Quincy and Beatrice took a trip back to Enid. The town had grown significantly, with new buildings and paved streets. They visited Doc Harrison, who was now retired but still sharp as ever. They had dinner at the hotel where they had stayed during the trial, and they walked the streets holding hands like young lovers. 25 years, Beatrice said as they stood outside the old boarding house where she had lived before Hutchins attacked her. "Can you believe it? Best 25 years of my life," Quincy said. "I would live them all over again if I could. Even the hard parts?" she asked. "Especially the hard parts," he said, "because they made us who we are. They taught us to value what we have, to never take each other for granted." They walked down to the edge of town, to the place near the creek where Quincy had found her. Someone had built a house there now, but the creek still flowed, and the cottonwood trees still rustled in the wind. "This is where it all started," Beatrice said softly. "Where you saved my life." "No," Quincy said, turning her to face him. "This is where we saved each other. You gave my life purpose and meaning. You made me believe in love and family and hope. We saved each other, Beatrice. That is the truth of it." She smiled up at him, this man who had been her savior, her protector, her partner, her love. "Then I am glad we found each other that day. I am glad you made a promise and kept it. I am glad for all of it." "So am I," he said, kissing her as the creek flowed past them, as the wind whispered through the trees. As the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, they both called home. They returned to their ranch, to their children and grandchildren, to the life they had built with hard work and determination and love. And as they grew older together, their hair turning gray and their steps slowing, their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, a foundation that could weather any storm. Quincy passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, with Beatrice holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but she did not regret a single day they had spent together. He had given her 43 years of love and partnership, and she carried those memories like treasures in her heart. Beatrice lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the man who had found a broken woman by a creek and promised to protect her, about how he had kept that promise every day of his life. When she finally joined Quincy, she was buried beside him in the small cemetery on their land, under a cottonwood tree. Their grandchildren carved their names into a simple stone, along with the words that had started it all. That will never happen again, and it never did. The love they built, the family they created, the life they shared, all of it stood as a testament to the power of courage and compassion, to the idea that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for something better. Their descendants continued to work the land, passing down the story of Quincy and Beatrice through generations. And whenever someone faced hardship or fear, they would remember their ancestors who had overcome so much, and they would find the strength to keep going. Because that was the true legacy of Quincy and Beatrice Whitman. Not just the land they left behind or the children they raised, but the lesson that love is stronger than fear, that kindness matters, that promises kept can change the world. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built a life on trust and respect and deep, abiding love. A cowboy who made a promise, and a woman who found the courage to believe in tomorrow. Together, they proved that even in the wild, untamed landscape of the Oklahoma Territory in 1889, love could flourish and grow into something beautiful and lasting. Their story became legend in that part of the country, told and retold around fires and dinner tables, a reminder that heroes did not always carry guns or wear badges. Sometimes they were just ordinary people who chose to do the right thing, who saw someone in need and offered help without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that choice led to a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a love that changed everything. That was the story of Quincy Whitman and Beatrice Gallagher, and it was a story worth telling.